Outside the Book continues. I'm Barbara Deeb. We're coming to you from the Southern Kentucky Festival of Books, where we take you inside the author's mind and outside the book. Joining us now, very popular author, Katherine Howe. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm delighted.
You're a native Texan,
It's
and
true.
yet you write about something so different than Texas. And in particular, your book, the Psychic Book of Deliverance, Dane, which you say is a mouthful, quite popular. You're dealing with the Northeast at this point.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. I relocated to the Northeast, to the East Coast, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, when I was in graduate school. And I'm trained as a historian, so I came to study American Studies at Boston University. And I have to say, I was just inspired by the surroundings. My husband and I moved to a small town called Marblehead, Massachusetts, which is one town over from Salem. And I don't know if you've ever been to Salem today, but Salem today has a lot of kind of witchy activities, as you can imagine. It's very festive, especially around Halloween. And I was really struck that here I was living in a part of the world where for generations upon generations upon generations, people really believed that witchcraft was real. And so the story in the Physic Book of Deliverance, Dane, is a Harvard graduate student discovers that one of the Salem witches might have been the real thing, but not the real thing in the pointy hat and fantasy sense, the real thing in the way that the colonists actually believed witches to be.
Now, so I gotta ask, living there, doing the research for this, did you come away with a different opinion about that subject?
Well, you know, New England is kind of a haunted place, and I have to be honest with you. You know, we lived in a house that was built in 1705, and there was one afternoon when I was making dinner for my husband and for his little brother who was visiting, and it was a hot summer day, and I was making something on the stove, and I don't know why I was using the stove. It was boiling hot, and my sweat is running down my body, and the house has been standing since 1705, and I had one of those moments where here I am, my family's in the other room, I'm in this space doing this thing that women have been doing forever. And it was really a profound moment for me. I felt like one of the things we like to look for in historical fiction, I think, is communion with the past, a deeper understanding of what it felt like to live in the past. So in the Physic Book of Deliverance, Dane, I'm really exploring what it felt like to be living during the time period of the Salem witch trials.
And so in this day and time with a modern audience, is that something that rings true, in your opinion, across the board, that most people can connect with that? You know, you mentioned this communion with the past, that searching for.
I think the real goal that we look for in fiction is empathy. I mean, I think one of the central things that we look for in fiction is to try to understand what it feels like to be another person. I mean, any one of us who sat down and read a novel and actually cried at the end and realized that we're crying over the fates of people who have been completely made up. I mean, I think that fiction exists in order to bring us out of ourselves, to let us travel to a different time and a different place, and to experience what it feels like to be other people.
And romance, you know, you're lauded for your period details,
Yes.
certainly your research, and romance. Now, romance is kind of like humor.
Hard.
That's a tough one.
It is hard.
Yes.
It is hard, and I'm kind of a square, so it's a little bit tricky for me. It's hard when you know your mother's going to read a book. I
Yes,
think, to get
gotta
really,
be careful.
So I'm a little square that way. The Physic Book of Deliverance, Dane, does have a romantic story right at the center. My graduate student character, whose name is Connie Goodwin, stumbles into a guy who is working as a steeplejack. His name is Sam, and one of his reasons for being in her life is to kind of pull her out of her brain. She spends so much time in her mind, and she's not really engaging with the world, and I think that her romantic relationship with Sam is important to that. Similarly, the story in my second novel, The House of Velvet and Glass, is very much a love story, and it's about finding love a little bit later in life when you least expect it.
And so how tough is that? I mean, method acting, method writing, you know, how do you do the research for that, or how do you get that empathy from your characters?
Well, certainly with the love story, a lot of people teased me with Physic Book of Deliverance, Dane. They think that Sam is based on my husband. He
Okay.
shares my husband's sense of humor, to be sure. But I think that for a lot of us, it's not so difficult to think our way into different people. And so I spend a lot of time researching looking at historical details, but also just thinking about what it feels like to be other people. And I should warn anyone who sits next to me in a cafe, I am listening to you, and I might be writing down what you're saying.
And not only writing down what you're saying, but also observing and kind of taking that person in.
Absolutely.
Not always so easy to do. So what you're telling me is you spend time in cafes and you observe and you listen, but how do you write? Do you have a system, a method?
I do. I get up in the morning and I make coffee first thing because I'm hopeless caffeine addict. And then I usually sit down and start working right away. And so when I'm in a drafting mode, I can be a little bit weird to be around because I'll sit in my pajamas working until I discover that I haven't had anything to eat, and it'll be hours and hours later. And so sometimes I'll leave the house in order to work in a cafe, but I tend to work in a very focused way. Some novelists like to dive right in and see where the characters take them. I'm more of a detail-oriented person. I like to use a pretty substantial outline. And when I'm drafting, sometimes to make myself be productive, I'll give myself a word count assignment for the day. When I was working on my second novel, The House of Velvet and Glass, I made myself write 1,500 words a day, which is a lot.
You are tough on yourself.
I'm really very brutal, yes.
But you're also a teacher.
Yes. I'm teaching right now at Cornell University in the American Studies program, class on historical fiction, and then I'll also be teaching a class on ghosts and the position of ghosts in fiction and in American culture.
Do you believe in ghosts?
I can't answer that question. Do you believe in ghosts?
I can't answer that question either. So what's ahead for you? Your new book? I mean, is there something yet to do, like something down the road that you hope to accomplish?
Well, definitely. I have another novel that's coming out, and this one is going to be aimed at a young adult audience, in fact. It's called Conversion. The title could change. It'll be out next summer 2014. And it's sort of a modern-day updating of The Crucible. And it's based a little bit on an outbreak of conversion disorder that happened in Leroy, New York last spring. It was all over the news. I don't know if you guys happen to see it around here, but a group of teenage girls in a town not far from where we live, not far from Cornell, started behaving in a very strange way and speaking disordered speech and twitching, and they couldn't control their bodies. And so no one could figure out what was the matter with them. And so it was all over the news media, and I've taken that story because obviously it reminded me a lot of what happened to the young girls in Salem. So I'm taking that story and I'm putting it in Massachusetts for a modern context, and it's called Conversion.
And young adult, that's a whole different audience.
It is a slightly different audience, although you'd be surprised how many grown-ups secretly read young adult. Maybe they don't broadcast it, but it's pretty widely read. The thing that I'm interested in with that is Physic book of Deliverance, Dane looks at the Salem witch trials from the witch's point of view. But I wanted to look at it from the afflicted girl's point of view. And I was very interested in watching this story in Leroy, New York unfold, how young teenage girls today you'd think have it a lot easier than teenage girls living in 17th century Massachusetts, and yet teenage girls today are under so much stress and pressure that their bodies literally can't take it. And that was a very interesting question for me, and so that's something that I explore in Conversion.
I can't wait to read it.
Yes.
I'll read one of those young adults. I'm one of those people.
That's okay.
Thank you so much. Continued success to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Author Katherine Howe.